Cast of the series East, West, Home's Best. This is a series in which people from different groups within the immigrant community talk about the countries they've come from, their expectations of life in Britain, and their reactions since arriving here. So far in the series, we've heard from people who've arrived here recently from Asia and the West Indies. In this evening's programme, and also next week, we turn to people from Africa, starting tonight with the Kenyan experience. The programme's compiled and presented by Sandra Naidu.
The old Kenya, as opposed to the new Kenya, had a record of turbulent relations with Britain, and amongst the older generation there's probably still a strong awareness of this. But amongst the younger Kenyans, who've lived most of their lives since independence, this country has no ogres. It represents, more simply, just another place to visit, maybe to settle in, maybe just to sample before returning home or moving on. At least, that's true of most young Kenyans. For the Asian Kenyans, it's a slightly different story. Perhaps their expectations of Britain were higher. Maybe the disappointments were all the greater because their loyalties were severely tested when they found that they couldn't, in practical terms, regard Britain as home. And for those who are now living in this country, there is perhaps a stronger identification with other Kenyans than there ever was back in East Africa.
To me, the Swahilis are a people who have the same ideas, the same outlook towards life. They don't necessarily have to be indigenous Africans, they don't necessarily have to be Indians, they don't have to be Europeans, but people who have lived in the coast of East Africa and have shared the same kind of, how do I say it? English is a funny language. Like, for example, Americans. When you say Americans, when you say he's an American, he doesn't have to be white, he doesn't have to be black, he doesn't have to be Chinese. Because of his outlook towards life, because of his way of life, because of his thinking, he's American.
It was a very integrated society over there. It was very surprising, but till I came here, I mean, I knew we had the Muslims and the Hindu religion, but beyond that, I didn't really know much. It was only when I came here that I realized the distinction of Pakistanis and Bengalis and Gujaratis and things. And then I realized that, a lot of my friends weren't really Gujaratis like I am. I mean, you followed your own religious customs, but then everybody followed everybody else's as well. And you kept your own as well as others.
Well, anything from Kenya to me is Kenyan. Whether it's grass or chair or wood or anything, it's Kenyan. I don't care, even if it is Chinese from Kenya, still a Kenyan, because to me, I think anyone who thinks Kenyan is a Kenyan, It's what you think, it's what you feel, it's your opinion, your way of life, that matters. Not what, your pigmentation is or whatever,
I like to think I'm Indian. I feel I have more of the Indian culture in me than any other culture. In Africa, we lived a Hindu life, an Indian life. The language you spoke at home was Gujarati. The food we ate, Gujarati food. In terms of morality, again, Hindu way of life. Most of the Africans I met were at school. The school that I went to was a cosmopolitan school. We had Indian, African, and European kids there. And on the whole, each community tended to keep to itself. The European community kept to itself, the Indian to itself, the African to itself.
There's some people like hunting, going, to the bushes, walk around there, see the animals, talk to the people, we've got town people and people stay outside town, in small huts and all that. They like, going there, tasting the homemade drinks, or they're roasting some meat in the bush. Everybody is from before. So I should say most of the Kenyans, one had his own land, from the previous grand and grands. So you find people settling the place, whatever happens, you got to keep that place. So that's how it goes. When you go out, you just go straight to your friends. You don't just wander about in the bush, not knowing where you're going. It's a bit free over there because I should say you hardly see roads. You just go there, you stay, you visit all your friends, I should say family, friends, relatives. And we've got few, got some cattle, grazing around, sheep and all that. In the morning they go and do some gardening. I mean, big gardens, not small ones. I mean, it depends what you've got. It's like we've got about 14 acres, and we grow some maize, potatoes, and all these things.
Is there a big sort of social difference, I mean, in terms of status between the town people and the country people?
Not really, because it's not two different people. You find, let's say, if I come from West, we go to school, and then we've got to go and work in towns, you see. You can't work in the rural areas. But let's say if your father is retired or something, or your brothers, your uncles, well, some of them prefer staying in the rural areas. It's hardly to see them buying houses in towns because they've got houses previously where they came from, most of them, I should say. When we are in town, when you're going to rural areas, they say, I'm going back home. They normally don't regard where you are working as your home. Your home is always where you come from, in the country.
Open spaces, I think, are quite important. They convey a feeling of freedom. You could go out and be lost in a so-called bush for an hour, 2 hours. They're very hot. The sky's not blue as we get, say, blue here in spring. It's white. You can't see the sky. A very strong sunlight, and the colors are green, brown. A few miles could make a lot of difference if there's a river around. The vegetation around there is that of a jungle, and I find it pleasant. Huge trees, creepers. It's peaceful.
Here it's all sort of planned out that you should have countryside, sort of starting from here, and that is left as countryside. And we should build an urban area out here. Whereas it is more natural in Kenya because it fits in with the urban area more.
My first impressions were looking up and saying white dustbin men, postmen. It was completely different, obviously. Over there, it was Africans doing the sort of dirty, menial jobs, and you come over here and you see actually white people on the streets doing these sort of jobs, and I think, my God, that is what it's all about out there. It's so grand, sort of very upper class, and out here you see it's no difference really, natives of any country.
Most of my friends are English. The ones I've met, well, they seem to be just the normal people, I should say. We rhyme in everything. Well, when we go for a drink, we chat, we laugh and all that. Some people might say some English people don't like the natives from Africa and all that, but I haven't met them. But I had heard people talking about sort of things here. So I don't know what exactly they mean. Maybe different places, different people, different ideas.
They always ask me, had I ever seen a stone house before I came to London? Did we have snakes in the house? Had I ever seen a car? It amazed me that they could actually ask such stupid questions, I thought. You've got straight hair. Are you African? How can you be African? You don't look very dark. Well, you've got not too flat a nose. And, it was amazing. How can you be Indian if you're from Africa? Goodness, you look like an Indian, but are you African, And I just couldn't understand it. I said, well, I am Indian because I call myself Indian because my blood is Indian, my parents are Indian, and just because I happen to be born in Africa doesn't make me an African as such. But this is what they were amazed at,
Some Asians, for example, not all really, some of them would think that they are not Kenyans, that, there are those Asians from Kenya who have been here for a long time and maybe are British subjects, and they think they are more British than they are Kenyan. But when I talk to them, I see the trace of their being Kenyans more than British.
I live in a largely Indian society, yes, I think. I think it's mainly out of choice rather than compulsory, as far as I'm concerned. Because, well, when I was at boarding school, we didn't have any social life because we had to be in the house by about 5. But when I came to Manchester, I joined the Indian community. I think I prefer it that way. However much we might integrate, I think there's always a thin parting, invisible parting, and our customs are socially very, very different. And although I didn't mind integrating that much, I wasn't proud of my Indian heritage. I think think it basically all stems from the fact that we have a family bond. We believe in family unity. I mean, my mother wouldn't sort of edge me on to say, you got to find work, leave school at 16 and find work. No matter how poor we were, she would try and get me through to education. And also there's this respect we have for our elders. Indian boys and girls are independent in a way, but they will still, even after marriage, consult their parents if they are in any difficulties. Or even an Indian boy will still consult his parents as far as financial home problems and things go. And he expects the parents to stand up for him in society as well as within the home. And the parents expect the son to stand up for them in their old age.
In England, when you talk of a family, you mean the father, the mother, and the children. When I talk of my family, I mean my wife, my children, my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and the rest of them. I'm obligated to them. For example, myself, I'm married, and I've got 2 children. And there is my mother, she's old. I have to look after her. There's no old homes, old people's home. And even if there was, I wouldn't have thought of taking her there. It would be an affront to my thinking. I think that she is my mother and I must look after her. She is mine. I think there are a lot of things I see which I wouldn't think are good back home. No, I'm not saying they're not good here, I mean, the way life is here, I suppose these things are all right, these things are normal. But back home, they are not normal. I'll give an example. I was with a friend. I was staying with him. And we met his grandfather on the road. He never even told me he had a grandfather in the town, you see. And he said, oh, this is my grandfather, by the way. I said, oh, your grandfather. I mean, and then I talked to him about his grandfather. Do you look after him? Oh, no, he's staying at an old, something. He's staying at a place where, old people are staying or something like that, you see. They said, don't you feel obligated? Don't you think that it is your duty to look after your grandfather? After all, he's your grandfather. He said, well, I don't think, man, he can go anywhere. I don't care. He said something like that, and I thought that was strange. My grandfather, he's my father's father, and I must look after him.
Well, unless I went with my grandmother to the market or to the temple, my mother hardly ever went out, except sometimes in the evening when we went out as a family. So, apart from going out to the films, sometimes if my father took the whole family out to the beaches, there wasn't really a social life as such, just going out with the family.
Was that a very striking difference when you came to England? Did life change?
No, not really. I just lapsed into it. I hardly ever went out when I was in London at all. I think the first film I saw in London was after 5 years in London. I just lapsed into it, sitting in the house all day, coming home from school, helping my mother in the kitchen, cleaning up, clearing up, watching a bit of television, studying a bit, and off to bed. And the weekends also just lapsed into that.
How did that compare, though, with the life of the girls you knew at school? I mean, didn't it strike you as very different?
Yes, it did. But it didn't particularly bother me. I was quite happy with my little life, staying at home all day. It didn't bother me at all. I just accepted it as such. I knew my father wouldn't allow me to go to discos, films on my own. And I was quite happy, sitting at home, watching television and talking to my sisters or my mother.
Well, it hasn't changed much, actually, from what I had in Kenya, because both my parents are educated, and my father was a lawyer, and my mother was a teacher. So we weren't very restricted in what we were allowed to do. I haven't been as restricted as other Indian girls. Quite a lot of families in Kenya have been away for a long, long time from India, and we did have strong ties with our relations back home. But I think it was more so because they realized the value of just changing world and the society we would live in when we grew up, I think. And they realized that rather than let us fight it, it would be better if we could survive in it.
I think most people say the Indian community, I can only speak for the Indian community in East Africa, this has had to preserve some of its qualities. When it moved out of India, it started as a trickle. the community as a whole established itself basically in business. Also, it provided a lot of professional people. The Indian community provided a lot of professional people for Africa. Engineers, doctors, scientists, teachers. And it had to borrow quite a bit from the West. In a way, the community as a whole has learned to adapt itself, varying influences, absorb what it feels is good. I hope anyway, I hope that is the case, what is good in the other culture. I'd like to think that that would be the case for me.
After school I went straight on to college. The only time that it became lax was when I left home to go to college, so they had no option but to let me go. Otherwise, I think it would still have been the same thing. Even now, if I was at home for my holidays, you know, it would still be, Papa, can I go out? And I'll be back at such and such a time, and I have to be back at I'm 23 now, but if I go home and spend weekends, that would still very much be the same format. I went to a few more parties, extra parties than I would have done if I'd stayed at home. But apart from that, well, I don't smoke and I don't drink a lot, so it really made no difference, you know. Coming home, watching television, talking with my flatmates and going to bed.
I prefer, you know, driving around and all that. You know, keep on traveling, see what's going on in different cities. Let's say if you want to go to Manchester, for example, only walk 2 streets, you see. Ask people, where can I go for a drink or a nightclub? Whoever you ask anything, let's say you're lost or you're looking for a place. If a policeman is not around, well, anybody will help you.
Mispronunciations, you know, is very, you know, like once I said something like, hello, me old cocky sparrow, instead of saying, hello, me old cock sparrow. This is a Cockney, you know, thing. And cocky sparrow could mean a lot of things, like, it should be me old cock sparrow, you know. So I thought I was right, and it was a big joke, you know. And it still exists where, in my local pub, you know, they always call me, hello, me old cocky sparrow, you know.
I think that there is a kind of difference. Maybe because of the area I'm staying, most of the people I meet there are simple people, you see, Cockneys, and their accent, their expressions are so different from the way I learned English in school. And I get hard time to understand what they're trying to say. I don't think they have difficulties in understanding me. It's me understanding them. You know, there was a time when I went to a pub and I was saying to this fellow, I want a pint of lager. And I don't know what he said, you know, it's the way he had put it, you know, the way he had answered, you know, it was so local that, you know, it was difficult for me to understand, and I had to ask my friend, what is he saying? And he told me, he said 40 or something, 40 pence, but it sounded like he was saying something else, you know, like it was out of this whole place.
I don't have any English friend except my wife. Or the kids would grow up according to my culture. No matter who you go with, who you stick with, it's one type of unexplainable, really, you know. They'll do exactly what my father did, but not in the term of traditional Orthodox stuff, you know. But they'll just be Swahili kids, not English kids.
I've noticed one thing here. I've seen the children, you know, shall I say very naughty? You know, like a child, I went to one cafe sometimes back, and I was sitting there, and there was this small boy. He was about 10, I think, and he was noisy, and he was pushing everybody. He was throwing everything. You know, a child at that age back home would be doing that, you know. Her father would come up, his father would come up and say, no, don't do it, and the child would sit and won't do it. But here, if you say, don't do it, he says, why should I not do it? You know, and he goes on doing what he feels like everybody's doing his thing. Well, it's not bad to do your thing, but then I feel there ought to be a limit. I mean, this is the way I was brought up.
It's quite difficult. I found at first, when I turned on the radio, I listened to English music. It was all right for 5 minutes, but after that I couldn't take it. You know, I just didn't like it. And after a year, or 1.5 years, I noticed I'd begun in this process of learning to like European music. I still can't listen for a long time to English classical music or European classical music. I think I still have not adapted myself to that. I do not like it. I can listen to Indian classical music like Lata Mangeshkar, Muhammad Rafi, with old songs mostly, probably because I heard them more whilst I was in Kenya.
Mostly they normally ask you, oh, you want to go to a pub for a drink or a hotel or something. I say, yeah, pub. And you just walk in and you buy your drink. And then you decide to look around what the town is like. And if you want to go to a club, like I'm used to, because I was a musician before, then you tell them what sort of club you want, because I notice most clubs in England, they've got different music in different clubs. So it's your choice. I prefer soul music. So I normally go to soul clubs, where they play soul music.
Well, I've been a musician all my life. We just came as a group, we're playing in Nairobi, and we came to London, and that's how it started, and we got an agent and manager and so forth, and we went on that way. We do gigs, yes, where most colored people are, because they're the ones who obviously appreciate our music. Maybe we've got complexes, I don't know, but we'd rather play for colored audiences because it seems to be that they would, they tend to appreciate it more. I don't know why. But we've played for, 100% white audience, and they even appreciated it more. But then they don't appreciate the music, but they just dance to the boom, boom, boom beat. We are like ambassadors of our country, musically speaking, We are trying to make people realize that such music do exist,
Indians coming from East Africa tend to mix more than those coming from India, because I think it's basically because in having come from India to East Africa, we had to mix anyway, and we are more of a easygoing nature, and we accept the integrated society without question.
As long as I'm with people, I'm not too fussed on going to this or the other things. I mean, I've been to a few museums and things, but I think that was mainly because of A-levels in school, where you had to go to the zoo and things like that.
So I find when I go out with women of other cultures, English, German, Japanese, Chinese, after a time, we are on a different wavelength. I can't put it in words, but I feel that we are not talking about the same thing. There are certain things, certain types of behavior. I expect, this is inbred in me, this is me. I expect the woman to understand, to behave in front of other people. This is, I suppose, an Indian way. Say an English girl, now she's brought up in her own culture, her own way of behavior. To her, that is right. That way of behavior is right. Fair enough. That's right for her. I do not find them flamboyant. I do not find English girls flamboyant, too noisy. I find them attractive. Now, at the moment, I think that I would be happier with an Indian girl, marry her and begin a family when the time comes. There are many things in a marriage when it's such a close relationship. I mean, I have no strong objections to my wife, a woman I love, coming from any culture at all. Who knows, I might marry an English girl. But I feel, the way I see my parents' marriage, that's the only marriage I've observed at close quarters. They're very frank with each other, very honest. They support each other in many things. There are certain unspoken rules of behavior. There might be differences in Indian life which a European does not. And by that I mean European, English, French, German, does not ever think about. Where to an Indian, those things could be quite important, and vice versa.
Will it be an arranged marriage?
I don't think so, no. Well, arranged in some senses, but not an arranged marriage in the old-fashioned idea of an arranged marriage. Presumably, if I meet somebody I like, somebody who I think I do want to marry, I would present him at home to mother, to mommy, and if after that it depends a lot on whether she approves or not. It would be arranged to that extent, and whether the families are compatible or not. But I don't think it'd be arranged marriage in the sense I've never seen him before, and my mother's picked him out, no.
Well, it's a bit difficult with me because I'm going to marry an Irish man. So we haven't quite talked about the future yet. He's from Northern Ireland, but he's definitely not going back there, the situation and everything. So we're thinking about settling in England, London, Ireland, abroad. It's probably caused more problems with his family than with mine. I don't know, his mother was sort of very much, you know, oh yes, are you Catholic? Well, do you realize you'll have problems? I don't think problems can be put down to religious reasons at all. Probably cultural differences, but you've got to give and take, adapt yourself to each other.
I spent 10 years here, and I think it has affected me in terms of everyday life, things I like going down to the pub. I really like it, but I do not know where I'd be in 10 years' time.
I would probably be a bit stable at home, mentally, than what I am here. It's all these big cities, you know, at home, like Mombasa is a very small place compared to London, that is, you know, and all these undergrounds and things like that. They send you a bit, you know, mad, don't they? 'Cause living in Britain is all acting, isn't it? Most of it is acting, you know, this, that. But in Kenya, it's all normal. A minister or member of parliament will come and talk to you. Here, no member of parliament will come to talk to a worker in the streets.
I regard Africa as my home, yes, but I do not think the African culture has affected me quite a lot. Had I been exposed to it at an early age and used that culture to express myself, then I would have, but it would not be fair for me to say that I've participated, absorbed in any African culture. Here I see that even the educated European, when he writes the book, a psychologist, he will talk about the primitive culture, and he will immediately point his finger to a Negro and say the African is primitive. I say, who the hell are you to say the African is primitive? He has his own right and wrong.
That was the 7th programme in the series East, West, Home's Best. It was compiled and presented by Sandra Naidu and was first broadcast in July of last year. The series was produced by John Thomas.